Welcome to the latest episode of the Influencers series and a profile of a man executed by the Catholic Church for his numerous supposed heresies, Giordano Bruno. The biography and information presented in this video is extracted from my book in progress, Sins of the Fathers. Bruno was an Italian priest who held some remarkably open-minded ideas for his era, and for this daring he became the only man to be excommunicated by the Catholics in 1576, the Calvinists in 1579, and the Lutherans in 1589. In one of the most brutal acts of inhumanity and intolerance perpetrated by the Catholic Church, on February 17, 1600, with his tongue encased in a metal plate to prevent his heresies being heard, Bruno was stripped naked, tied to the stake, and burned alive in Rome's Campo di Fiori Square. What particular heresy, or all of them taken together, led to his execution is a matter of speculation, as the records of the 8 charges he faced at his trial were lost. Scholars disagree on the exact point which led to the sentence that so incensed the Inquisition judges, including Cardinal Bellarmine, who would play a key role in the trial of Galileo 16 years later. Many scholars are of the opinion that it was Bruno's ideas that were contrary to Catholic faith, not his cosmology, which sealed his fate. For example, by the time he was 18, he was already expressing doubts about the Trinity, one of the factors in his excommunication from Catholicism. Bruno went on to further attack the Christian hostility to knowledge initiated by Paul and amplified by Augustine, their claims that faith was superior to secular learning, and that the faithful should be like children and obey the clergy. He also mocked the communion ceremony and the scholastic linguistic gymnastics employed to rationalize how the bread and wine literally transubstantiated into the real flesh and blood of Jesus. For Bruno, Christianity was a wretched story and a worthless, pernicious fable, comprised of foolish faith and blind credulity. Any one of these opinions in isolation would have been enough to provoke the ire of the Church, but taken together, and with his plurality of world's cosmology, Bruno was too much of a threat and had to be silenced. Aside from his opinions on Christianity, Bruno had many groundbreaking insights into cosmology and philosophy. Bruno was one of the early adopters of the heliocentric theory of the solar system, and in 1584 he published the Ash Wednesday Supper, in which he declared the fixed spheres of the Aristotelian Ptolemaic Earth-centric model was disproven by the observations of Copernicus. Bruno also speculated that the universe was infinite, a dramatic shift in his conceptions that occurred around 1583 to 1584, a realization upon which he became entirely certain of the Copernican model. The multi-planetary solar systems he postulated derived from his speculations on the Copernican model, writing, "What we say about the Earth we apply also to the Sun and the other stars, in which, because of the same principles, the same composition can be observed." Copernicus failed to realize the full impact of his heliocentric model and did not take it to its logical conclusion, as Bruno did from pure speculation, in negating the existing Aristotelian arguments for a static and finite cosmos. Bruno was the first to recognize that stars were probably other suns, like Earth's own, and therefore likely had their own planetary systems which could sustain life, just as had occurred in our own solar system. Given that Christian doctrine decreed that salvation is conditional upon the belief in the sacrifice of Jesus to redeem humanity, the existence of planets and societies who would never have heard of a universal God's incarnation and resurrection on our pale blue dot may have been enough of a threat to church authority that it warranted his death. Bruno's hypothesis impudently exposed that Earth is not the center of the universe and just how relative ideas of salvation were in the grand scheme of the cosmos, and the Church was particularly sensitive to any challenge of the narratives upon which its authority was grounded. Given what Bruno thought, wrote, and talked openly about, he was eventually arrested by the Church authorities. Whether it was Bruno's cosmology, which included the presence of life in alien solar systems, or his denial of certain basic Christian dogmas, or both, scholars will probably never know. That is, unless the lost trial documents turn up in some archive in the future. On December 21, 1599, after a 7-year trial during which he was imprisoned, Bruno refused to bow to church pressure, stating there was nothing for him to recant. On January 20, 1600, the Inquisition tribunal presided over by Pope Clement VIII decreed that Bruno should be turned over to the secular authorities as an impenitent, pernicious, and obstinate heretic for the death sentence to be carried out, and ordered his writings to be listed on the Index of Prohibited Books. While the Catholic Church has apologized for their treatment of Galileo, it has yet to demonstrate any shame over the death sentence handed down to Bruno. Due to this injustice, many secular advocates regard Bruno as a martyr for the advancement of science and freedom of thought. His cosmological conceptions and advancement of the Copernican model pushed the boundaries of accepted wisdom of his time, for which he paid the ultimate price for challenging the Church's stance on the scripturally ordained Earth-centric view, kick-starting a new scientific era that would lead humanity to an understanding of nature's place within a larger universe. Then, one of the biggest insults to papal pride occurred in what Kurtzer termed the symbolic completion of Italian unification, the erection of a statue in memory of Giordano Bruno in 1889. In 1884, students at the University of Rome launched an international call for funds to create the monument, an appeal which met with resounding success not only financially, but it included signatories to the petition from the scientific and literary giants of the age. By June 1886, having collected more than needed, the organizers submitted a formal petition to erect the statue in the Campo di Fiori, where Bruno had been executed. The Church, of course, felt offended by this insult, yet popular support for Bruno's monument grew daily. A prominent leftist parliamentarian, Giovanni Bovio, noted the people's support came from the fact that the Church has never had its reckoning for this travesty of justice. On June 9, 1889, 10,000 people from all over Italy came to witness the unveiling and pay their respects to this martyr for free thought, and Kurtzer writes that 2,000 organizations were represented. Despite there being no physical threat to the Pope from the thousands of Bruno supporters in Rome, Leo invited his nuncios to be with him and provide comfort during the unveiling. On June 30th, Leo pitifully bemoaned the insult and underlying threat of Bruno's statue to his office, claiming, "Our own person is in danger," in a formal address to the cardinals known as a papal allocution, and further that the most profound humiliation of its spiritual head and of its see, reinforced by the monument glorifying apostasy and impiety. Around the base of the statue are 8 medallions to other men who clashed with religious authority, such as the Englishman John Wycliffe and the Bohemian Jan Hus, both of whom will be featured in future influencer videos. In October 1890, Leo reiterated his wounded pride about Bruno's statue and what an insult it was to the papacy in an encyclical which is the apex of papal whining about the modern world and the Church's zealous desire to drag the world back into the Middle Ages. Then, in February 2000, on the 400th anniversary of Bruno's execution, then Cardinal Secretary of State Angelo Sedano issued a letter that, while acknowledging the brutality of the execution, appears to justify it as necessary to protect the Catholic faith, as Bruno's ideas were irreconcilable with Christian doctrine, given his departure from the faith. Contrary to the Catholic Church assertion, which has repeatedly condemned modern liberal attitudes as morally relativistic, it is in fact religion that picks and chooses its relative morals. As Pinker points out, Sedano's thinking demonstrates exactly the kind of moral relativism characteristic of theistic rationalizations that attempt to justify an immoral act. As if to prove Pinker's point, in what could be described as karmic justice or poetic irony, on December 21st, 2019, the very same day Bruno refused to recant 420 years earlier, Sedano resigned as Dean of the College of Cardinals due to his leading efforts to cover up the ongoing sexual abuse scandals. Sedano was also personally involved with shielding Marcial Maciel, the notorious Mexican serial sexual abuser, from investigation. Though, in keeping with its pattern of rhetorical posturing, the Vatican announced Sedano, 92 years old, resigned due to age. Coincidentally, on the very same day Maciel's Legion of Christ released its report of their internal investigation into abuse by their order. Perhaps the world needs to wait another 400 years for an apology for the Church's treatment of Bruno, while it scurries about preoccupied by legions of sex scandals. If you like my content, please like and subscribe to get notified of new videos. Please also consider supporting my work by becoming a Patreon sponsor. You can also find me on the following platforms: